My name is Matt Baldwin. I'm the Managing Director of Coast Communications. We're a public relations and communications consultancy, and we've been working with the Meridian West team for many years. I'm sure many of you will have noticed over the last 18 months an explosion in thought leadership content from professional and financial services firms. And the early signs are from over the summer and into the autumn that shows no sign of abating at all. One of the things that we've noticed is that firms seem to be adopting a much more campaign-led approach to their marketing and business development, and not afraid to tackle the really big themes of the day. We've seen campaigns, very successful campaigns, looking at the future of work, ESG, climate impact, and of course technology. And it can be challenging to cut through the noise and find that authentic and powerful voice. Today, with the Meridian West team, we're going to be looking at three, what we think are really cutting edge research techniques to help professional and financial services firms cut through that noise. And we're going to share with you some examples of those research techniques in action. As Diana said at the beginning, we welcome some questions and observations, comments you may have. What I would suggest is either raise your virtual hand or put a question in the chat function, and I will come and find you and invite you to share your thoughts. But before we kick off, I thought let's introduce our speakers, Ben and Jonathan. Ben, why don't you say hello, and then Jonathan afterwards.
Well, thanks a lot, Matt. So yes, I'm Ben Kent. I'm the director at Meridian West. I founded the business almost 20 years ago, and we specialise in research for professional and financial services firms. A large proportion of our work is doing these thought leadership campaigns. So we help firms kind of develop the ideas, collect the research either through online surveys or in-depth interviews, and also we have a team of copywriters, including Matt, who can write up the reports and increasingly developing sort of digital assets. So we've worked on kind of over 80 campaigns during the course of Meridian West's history.
Jonathan?
Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan. I'm an Associate Director at Meridian West. So I've worked on a number of our thought leadership, market strategy, client insight campaigns with the range of clients we've got at Meridian West, including a number of people on this call who, by the way, should feel free to raise their hand, ask questions at any point, as should anyone else.
Good. Well, thank you, Ben, Jonathan. The first question, I think I'm going to put my first question to Jonathan, and one of the most exciting things I think I've seen, particularly over the last sort of 24, 36 months, is how technology is being used in research to sort of benchmark and personalize thought leadership, which I think is a really powerful way of sharing insights. And I just wonder, Jonathan, if you could share with us first, what do we actually mean when we're talking about personalized thought leadership, and how can technology make that happen?
So personalizing thought leadership is about tailoring your outputs to your audience. So the one-size-fits-all approach of producing a big global report certainly still has its place, and we know from our own research that buyers of professional services still value them. But then there are different approaches that can supplement this and provide better opportunities for direct engagement with clients. So people want to hear about things that are relevant to them. If you can speak to them about things that are specific to them, not just relevant, that's even better. So as an example, if someone were to get in touch with me and want to speak to me about a report they've produced about businesses in the UK, I might not be super interested. If it was about professional services marketing landscape in the UK, I would be more interested. If someone's conducted thought leadership in the professional services marketing space, as part of that, they can analyze Meridian West, our competitors' activity, produce a report bespoke to us about what good looks like, how we can improve. Of course, I'd be interested in that. Who wouldn't be? It's a no-brainer. And to produce something like that isn't that hard, especially with the growth of technology in the last kind of 18 months. So particularly through dashboards, you can produce personalized outputs for specific respondents. And that's a really good way of connecting with people and organizations, gathering data for thought leadership campaigns, but also fueling conversations. And we've taken this approach with a number of clients. So as part of a campaign, their clients fill out a survey, a dashboard accompanies this, which produces tailored outputs for clients. So for example, you produce a report showing what businesses of a similar size, region, industry are doing, how this research relates to them, where you might be falling behind, where you're ahead, and crucially, how we can help you progress. And this makes it a productive conversation for both sides. And let me just get this deck up. One great example of this is the A&O Future of the In-House Legal Function campaign. So they spoke to and surveyed a number of their clients on the topic of innovation in legal service delivery. So things like operating models, ways of working, drivers, barriers, challenges, successes. They produced loads of really interesting content, which I'm sure people will have seen on LinkedIn, alongside several really interesting reports, which you can find on their website. And one thing they also used is a benchmarking portal to facilitate one-on-one meetings and conversations. So they complete the survey and then they can have a meeting and get a report detailing how they sit amongst their competitors, which is a catalyst for many, many productive meetings.
I think what's quite interesting in this, Jonathan, isn't it? It actually shifts the dial slightly from thought leadership as a way of raising profile at a broadcast at a very general level to actually very targeted thought leadership as a very powerful business development tool.
Exactly. So it's not just a case of kind of showcasing your thinking about a specific industry. That is part of it, but you can have one-on-one individual conversations bespoke to people, and thought leadership is all about driving kind of client engagement and fueling those conversations. And this is a great way of doing it.
Ben, a sort of a question for you, picking up on this is what kind of data sets, what kind of research inputs are you going to need to make this work in a really powerful way? Do you need a big data set to make this work, or can it work on quite small and targeted insights?
I think you would aim to get at least a kind of 100 responses, because otherwise the benchmarks are not really meaningful. But it's kind of widely applicable. So this is about legal innovation, but we've used it in relation to tax function and how people are managing a tax function. We're looking at next generation families. We've looked at philanthropy. So it's kind of widely applicable to all sorts of different audiences, because everyone's interested in how do we compare, and also what does good look like, and what can we do to kind of emulate good.
Yeah. And of course, it's not always possible or desirable to conduct large-scale surveys, and for maybe some of the smaller or mid-tier firms, they may not have the reach or clout to do that. And one of the things we've seen firms of many sizes doing is sort of turning to the C-suite panels. To create thought leadership, and often sort of much shorter, sort of the regular pulse surveys. And I wonder if you could sort of explain maybe how these panels work. Do they need to be C-suite to make a panel work? How often perhaps should you go to them, and what sort of insights could you gain from those? And I wonder if there is a way of actually combining a C-suite panel into this kind of benchmarking tool.
I think the answer is yes. I think ever since COVID, we've seen a kind of big rise in people doing kind of panels or pulse surveys, whatever you want to use. I think PwC probably was the earliest one to do this. So they do their big kind of annual CEO survey, and then once every 2 months or so, they will poll a proportion of their CEOs to kind of see how their views are changing. And that's kind of terrific, because what it means is you've got a whole suite of content coming out throughout the year. You don't need this kind of big bang kind of campaign that could last only 3 months. You can extend it for the kind of years and years, if you like. And I think the other benefit is things quickly date nowadays with COVID. The world is changing so much that you can go back and test how views have changed. So there's real benefits to it. And in terms of your point about kind of using panels, there's two approaches you can take. You can either the cheaper version, and kind of seems kind of the easier option is to kind of poll your clients. Obviously it's much less expensive. You don't need to pay to kind of use an external panel, but it's great for building relationships, but you do have difficulties about actually hitting the numbers, particularly hitting quotas. And so we've So what we're kind of increasingly doing is going to kind of external panels, and the quality of these is really improving. So you can access CEOs, general counsel, quite kind of esoteric audiences, not just in the UK, but globally. And the real benefit of those is you can turn it, they can pretty much guarantee a certain number of responses, you can hit quotas, and there's a fairly fast turnaround. So yeah, I'm becoming quite a fan of those.
If you're turning to your clients as a panel, is that sort of the ideal number of people to have on a panel like this? Does it need to be quite a hard number or a high number, or can you get quite good insights from a relatively small panel?
It depends how the niche the market is. If it's a really niche market, you can probably get away with 30. I think 50 is probably the kind of minimum for most surveys.
I think it's kind of how long is a piece of string though, because it really depends on what you're using it and the nature of the study. If it's a big global study and you're trying to do kind of country spotlights, industry spotlights, things like that, then it's going to have to be higher. But like Ben says, it could be a really finite universe. You're looking at something really niche. There's not a huge universe of people that you can talk to, in which case it will have to be a smaller number.
Is there a need to keep a panel sort of refreshed and sort of chopping and changing? Is there a risk? I mean, the PwC one, I think, has been going on for decades and is phenomenally successful. And I suspect very few firms outside of the Big Four are probably capable of pulling something off like that. But do you need to keep a panel fresh and new members coming in and other members dropping off to keep it interesting, to keep panelists engaged?
Yes. So if you do the DIY and you want to carry on going back to the panel and build your own panel, you need to treat those panelists with real care. You need to make sure you don't over-survey them. You need to make sure that your questions are really interesting and succinct. And also you need to kind of reward them for being on the panel. So give them a kind of early insight into the findings. And you do, naturally, people will drop off the panel, so you need to be looking for new people to add and explain the benefits.
I would say on the point of people dropping off, that's something you have to be really mindful of, and keeping it interesting is super important. Not just asking the same thing over and over again and looking at how people's opinions have changed, because that's why people are gonna drop off.
Yeah, I guess it's also quite a way of adding additional interest with the CEO or sort of a C-suite panel is to have your pulse survey data, but then supplement that with some more in-depth interviews and more deep dive insights.
Yeah, exactly. So that was exactly the approach we took with Pinson Mason. So just as COVID was kind of kicking off, we were commissioned to work with them to do a kind of pulse survey looking at life sciences, of course, changing massively. And so the technique we did there is we said we had an umbrella theme, which is all around innovation and collaboration within life sciences. But then what we did is we had sort of specific areas of focus. You can see them here: R&D, tax credits, collaboration, AI. And what we did is we did a couple of pulse surveys, but then supplemented those with in-depth interviews with Pinson partners to really pull out their kind of views. So essentially the online surveys gave us a view of this is what the life sciences market is doing, and then the partners could talk about the practicalities of that. And we also reached out to some of the leading lights in the life sciences industry as well. And the combination of quant and commentary worked really well.
It's always interesting because I think many firms we've seen sort of overlook their own internal audience, who are quite often really detailed subject matter specialists and can actually bring some really valued insights. And I think maybe one of the learning points there is don't forget your own internal audience.
Exactly. So in this instance, we got all the partners really heavily involved in this. We created this ideas lab, which is a workshop we developed, and so that they felt like they kind of owned the research, and that then they could go and speak to their clients about it. And I know Alice is on the phone on the call as well, and worked with us on this. Alice, have you got any other sort of comments around this particular project?
No, I think I would just echo that this was a very niche audience, and so when we were going to the panel providers, you talked a little bit about numbers. We weren't able to get those really big figures just because it's very, very busy time for people working in this industry. So we almost needed to make sure that we were balancing out the smaller figures that we got in the pulse survey with that partner insight, and as well as some in-depth interviews with other industry leaders. So I think if you're targeting a very niche industry, it is worth trying to supplement it with interviews and really detailed partner sort of technical insights as well.
I think, but what's also, and having seen this campaign sort of evolve over the last period of time, it's quite interesting. It adds a degree of longevity, I think, to a campaign, doesn't it? It's not that sort of research report, PR bang, and then everybody forgets about it and moves on to the next one. It gives it a real long tail.
Exactly. So this started actually pre-COVID and is still going. We're just sitting down and planning our next phase now.
Especially with the world changing so fast, if you had tried to plan this project, every single kind of output 18 months ago and get all the data in one fell swoop, the data would have been completely outdated after kind of 3 to 6 months, because 18 months ago, absolutely no one knew what the world would look like in, a month, let alone 18 months.
And there is another good learning point there is build flex into your thought leadership campaigns to allow them to reflect the environment that clients and peers are operating in. So we've seen two trends. We've seen the use of technology, sort of C-suite panels. And the third, and this is one that I find particularly exciting as a former journalist, is sort of the personal stories, thought leadership based around personal stories. And I think it works particularly well in sort of the private client, private wealth sectors and service lines that are directed to individuals. But it's also worked rather well with sort of entrepreneurial businesses, with founder stories and things like that. And Ben, perhaps maybe you could explain sort of some of the campaigns that you've seen here, how that works, and then Jonathan, maybe share some examples with us.
Yeah, exactly. I think because telling personal stories, I think it's become particularly has always been compelling. People are talking about risk management, for example. However great your research is quite a dry subject. So doing the in-depth interviews and case studies really brings some topics alive. And I think particularly since kind of COVID, I think that kind of division between business and personal is kind of breaking down. And I totally agree with it. It works particularly well in kind of entrepreneurial businesses, founder stories. But we've used it quite recently with very large professional services firms looking at philanthropists. And it's been absolutely fascinating. So it's looking at people who've made their money, very entrepreneurial, and then applying those skills and energy to doing good. And it's been terrific because you've got a real diversity, not just interviewing people in the UK and the US, but India, Africa. They tell their stories, and the kind of key is to kind of pull out not just kind of, isn't this terrific, but also some of the practical lessons. And so, I was kind of a real fan of these kind of personal stories approaches.
I think what's quite interesting, isn't it? And my experience is that firms can often be quite reluctant to ask their clients to share their own stories. But actually, the reality is often the reverse. They are only more delighted to share either their success, the lessons they have learned along the way, and how they've helped and inspired others. So I think it can be really powerful. Jonathan, have you? And there's one particular campaign that I've seen that stood out, is the Withers campaign, which I'm not entirely sure if it was a Meridian West one. So apologies for highlighting something that isn't.
It wasn't actually.
Yeah, get Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
I'll step down. But Jonathan, if there's any other examples that you've seen that perhaps you could share, would be quite interesting.
Sure. So just to reinforce the point that you guys are making. So I do think it's a great way of building relationships with clients who are doing kind of cutting edge things, showcasing the good work that they are doing and you're likely doing with them, and showing that you care about them. You know, often clients are proud of the things that they're doing, and it's a win-win. Sticking to the example that I showed earlier, as part of their campaign, A&O used a number of kind of personal stories to illustrate their points within their campaign. So through speaking and surveying a number of clients and including their stories and journey, a report was produced that it didn't only showcase A&O's kind of cutting edge thinking and predictions for the future of the in-house legal function, but also rooted it in the personal stories of the contributors. So now it's not just a case of talking about issues in general terms and what the future will look like. Now, as readers, you can read about businesses like you going through a similar journey to you, and how they worked through their issues and how they progressed, which is a lot more engaging and a lot more powerful.
No, very good. It'd be quite interesting. Those who have joined the webinar today, if anybody else has sort of used this sort of personal story route in their thought leadership, and any observations they might have. I personally, I can see this as becoming much more popular as a thought leadership, and newspapers have built hugely successful business models on telling personal stories, and I think the corporate world is waking up to that and using that quite powerfully.
Yeah, and so just to, I think the other thing is it lends itself really well to podcasts and video content. You know, particularly now as we're kind of opening up, you could then do sort of short videos. It also lends itself very well to LinkedIn. I think it does take a bit of care. You need to be careful about who you interview, and you want to kind of create an overall narrative and then the case studies focus on specific areas and pick your people right, carefully. You don't want to, you know, you do need people who've got a good story to tell and are fairly charismatic.
I think it's also quite interesting, isn't it, with these, is you need a good interviewer as well.
Yes.
It's actually having, you need the framework of questions that you're going to ask, but you need an interviewer, maybe someone with that sort of journalistic sort of approach that can spot other avenues as they open up. So you're not just rigidly following a script in your interviews, to delve and explore stories as they arise.
Yeah, spot on.
And this is an example of the Withers campaign. Sorry,
Yeah.
just to reinforce highlighting somebody else's work there. I think we are. How are we doing on time? We've got 5 minutes left. I wonder if anybody has any questions or observations that they might like to share with the rest of us over some of the campaigns that they have been involved in. And while we're waiting, some questions also that we have given a little bit of thought to in advance of this is, I wonder, Ben, Jonathan, how you can see the thought leadership landscape perhaps changing over the next sort of 12 months or so. I mean, it's something that is going to stay with professional firms for quite some time, but how do you see that landscape changing in the way firms approach thought leadership? Is it still going to be the very big themes? Is it going to be more at a practice level? And what sort of research techniques do you think they might be adopting? Ben, I'm going to pick on you first.
Oh, okay. I think one of the interesting things is a trend towards thought leadership no longer being something that's kind of delegated to the marketing function, that is something that the partners take ownership of themselves. And I think also kind of wanting in the sort of day-to-day advice that professionals are giving to have an element of strategic vision, future looking. And Jonathan's put up the chart here, which kind of illustrates the client appetite for this. So we do this kind of annual survey, over 500 buyers of UK buyers of professional services firms. And we ask them, what competence of your professionals adds the most value to your organisation? And now I would have thought technical competence would be right number one, and rapport and communication. But if you look at that one, technical knowledge is only mentioned by 13%. Strategic vision is 24%. Understanding industry trends is number 2. Understanding advanced technology is number 4. So I think there's a real appetite for not just thought leadership, but thought leaders.
Yeah. Dominic Withers has offered to sort of share some of his thoughts on the campaign they've put together. I mean, Dominic, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So maybe unmute yourself if you don't mind, and tell us why you sort of approach this sort of your thought leadership with this sort of personal story approach.
So yeah, our approach as a law firm, I suppose we're slightly different to your sort of most other law firms in that our focus is actually acting for individuals in a personal capacity, and also sort of families and family businesses. So we already have a very strong focus on individuals already. So those sort of personal stories is something that we think is a great way to sort of highlight our expertise, to get our name amongst people we maybe wouldn't be otherwise, who wouldn't otherwise be aware of us. So it's really been focused on sort of raising awareness of the firm. It's a big push in relation to social media. So lots of sharing where we've run a story on, it could be a founder. We've actually got the founder to share the story on their own feed as well. And then things have just gathered momentum. And so it's doing well. We're starting to see sort of bits of work actually come in sometimes, sort of linked to the campaign, or people using it as a way to reconnect with clients or people they haven't been in touch with for a while. So it's a first for us, but it's so far it seems to be doing really well. And we don't want to be putting out sort of dry legal content. We want to be discussing the topics that we think our clients are interested in.
Did Dominic, when looking to approach clients, were they broadly excited and willing to take part? Is there a degree of persuasion to get them on board? Was there a reluctance to ask clients to participate?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases it's clients, some cases it's contacts who we've got participating. Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, there is a reluctance, and you've seen the ones that you will see were the ones where we've been successful in convincing them. There've been a lot of others who we've had sort of, it hasn't worked out for whatever reason. So you have to, if you've got 6 interview slots, you've really got to have about 12 or 13 people you need to be approaching, because you have to accept that around half of them, it just won't work out with them. So yeah, that's I'd say, yeah, you've got to sort of hedge your bets a little bit. Some people are really delighted to be approached. Others, there can be a sort of a degree of reluctance around that. So it just depends, on their situation. And sometimes people will say they're happy to talk about certain topics. There may be really sensitive things that they don't want us touching on. So it often works for them as well as for us.
Brilliant, Dominic. Thank you ever so much for sharing. And I think if anybody wanted to have a look at more, I think it's quite visible on the Withers website, these stories and interviews, and well worth checking out. I think we're coming up to the half-hour mark. I wonder if anybody else has any further questions or any comments that they perhaps would like to share before we begin to draw to a close. And whilst people might be collecting their thoughts, I think we have Sian on the webinar as well, who's just going to flag a webinar coming up in the next few weeks, I believe.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I just wanted to invite you to our, it's actually a virtual roundtable led by Alistair Beddoe, our managing director. And it's accelerating your growth strategy through client listening. So it's using these research techniques to understand what you're currently delivering for your clients, and how what they value from your delivery. So you get past that kind of technical competence and to find the facets of what you're delivering that really makes a difference to your client and what strengthens that relationship. So that is on Tuesday, the 28th of September at 2:00. So if you'd like any further information, either email any one of the Meridian West team.
Or visit the events page on the Meridian West website. Indeed. So we have a question that's come in. Ben, any ideas on KPIs and how to demonstrate sort of return on investment and thought leadership? I think it's always been a challenge, and there are the very traditional measures of how many numbers of reports are downloaded and sort of PR hits and social hits. And I just wonder what other measures that you're seeing firms adopt and bring into their thought leadership programs.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's two types. There's the kind of digital activity, so downloads, visits to websites. Those are relatively easy to measure, but you should do it in any case. I think the other one is tracking the number of conversations. So using our CRM system to see, how many conversations has this resulted in. That's easier if you're doing the kind of personal benchmark, because you can actually track the number of kind of partner to client meetings. And then I think if you can then track it through to sales, that's always marvelous, but it tends to be kind of anecdotal, and obviously this is not the one factor that triggers the sale.
I think anecdotal measures are really, really powerful and should never be overlooked.
Exactly.
Right, I think we're over the half an hour. Thank you everybody for joining. We're looking forward to seeing you in the flesh soon.
Thanks.